This video is sponsored by TabForACause, more on them later.
Disruption.
According to legend, the Phrygian city of Gordium once housed a certain pillar, and tied to this pillar was an ox cart. Apparently, in ancient times, a farmer had ridden this cart into the city, fulfilled some obscure prophecy, declared himself king, and ended an interregnum. The Phrygians had tied this new king's cart to the pillar in commemoration, and it had remained there ever since, because the knot, this Gordian knot, was, well, it wasn't an ordinary knot. It was unthinkably complex, amazingly tight. One ancient historian described it as several knots, all so tightly entangled that it was impossible to see how they were fastened. Perhaps because of this mystique, a tradition emerged that whoever managed to unfasten the Gordian knot would become king of Asia. Many tried, many failed, until Alexander of Macedon came to town during his conquests. He saw the knot and knew untying it would be impossible, so he drew his sword and sliced the cart free. The Gordian knot was unfastened, and having passed this test, Alexander went on to conquer land all the way to India, fulfilling, in a sense, the prophecy. Now let's jump forward a few thousand years. The new Rian Johnson film Glass Onion, which, spoilers by the way, opens with the sequence showing intricate puzzle boxes being delivered to the inner circle of tech billionaire Miles Bron. My last video was all about these puzzle boxes, what they and the solving of them tell us about Glass Onion, its themes, and where the film's headed. But we didn't talk too much about the way this sequence ends. We're shown one final box, but this recipient doesn't do what the others do, play the recognition game, strip back the puzzle layer by layer. No, she picks up a hammer and smashes her way in. Like Alexander, she's passed this inscrutable test, but on her own terms, by ignoring the implied rules of play. And like Alexander, this is only the beginning. Over the course of the film, we learn this is Helen Brand. We learn that the box was sent to her sister, Cassandra Andy Brand, who Miles had recently secretly murdered, with an invitation to his Greek island, in order to cover his tracks, dispel suspicion. We learn that Helen had posed as Andy and accepted the invitation, gone to the island to try and figure out what had happened to her sister, and she succeeds. In plain view of the other guests, Miles circle his so-called disruptors, Helen and ace detective Benoit Blanc had exposed Miles' crimes, but not before the billionaire had burned the only shred of evidence incriminating him. Seeing what seems to be the writing on the wall, the disruptors close rank and begin to deny that they saw anything.
Raise your hand and say, I saw him take Duke's gun. I saw him that night at Andy's house. I saw the napkin before he burned it. You're still holding on to his titties. You shitheads.
It looks like Miles has won, that this puzzle's proven too complex for Helen. She can't solve it on Miles' terms or even on Blanc's. She can't untie the knot. So she stops trying and follows Alexander's example one more time. She starts smashing. She keeps smashing, keeps destroying Miles' little trophies, his monuments to abstract status, the piano, the statues, until, in a final flourish, she uses Miles' own experimental fuel to incinerate his biggest prize, the Mona Lisa itself, as well as the mansion housing it. Miles isn't harmed, not physically, but this act destroys him. He'd invited a bunch of leaders to the island in the near future to sell this new disaster fuel, but when word gets out that his house is in tatters, that he got the Mona Lisa destroyed, that same empty significance he'd used to build his image will turn against him and destroy it utterly. The reality distortion effect obscuring his malice and incompetency will finally shut down. And while Helen didn't end up getting the evidence to pin Miles to Andy's death, the others all understand that something has shifted. So like rats jumping from a sinking ship, they agree to testify against him. This revenge is messy, it's chaotic, it doesn't play by the rules, and Helen's only able to succeed by destroying something which ought to be beyond destruction. This, then, is disruption. But you don't have to take my word for it. Take Miles.
If you want to shake things up, you start with something small. You go with things that people are kind of tired of anyway. Everybody gets excited because you're busting up something that everyone wanted broken in the first place.
Why the hell not?
Yeah, go Helen. All right, go Helen.
That's the infraction point. That's the place where you have to look within yourself and ask, am I the kind of person who will keep going? Will you break more things, bigger things?
I think that belonged to Liberace.
Are you willing to break the thing that nobody wants you to break? Because at that point, people are not going to be on your side. They're going to tell you to stop. But that is what true disruption is.
To start with, the shitheads cheered on this destruction, when it seemed symbolically powerful but actually meaningless. This is acceptable disruption. This doesn't really change anything. And despite what they or Miles would tell you, this is where all these others stopped. But when Helen doesn't stop, when she starts wrecking genuine artifacts, their support wavers, they start to get cold feet. This is the inflection point, or as Miles would call it, the infraction point. They tell her to stop, but Helen doesn't waver. And to beat Miles, she breaks the thing that no one wants her to break. The shitheads kind of come around afterwards, but it's less getting on board than it is adjusting to a new status quo. Because what Glass Onion's telling us here, to the letter, is that Helen is the one true disruptor. But so what? Right? I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a cool beat. It underscores the hubris and hypocrisy of Miles Bron, those like him, his hangers-on, and so forth, and it's another little detail that blossoms beautifully upon rewatch, adding to that whole interrogation of perspective and viewership in this film that I've talked about before. This is a neat little conclusion, but it is just that. Little. And I am hardly the first person to notice it. So how about we take a leaf out of Glass Onion's book, mix things up, and use it as a jumping off point instead? Helen is the one true disruptor here. So what? What does that tell us about how Glass Onion understands Helen, understands her actions here, understands disruption? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Let's talk about this idea of disruption, because just like pretty much everything else he gets credit for, Miles Bron didn't come up with this. Disruption theory is a thing in business, and Glass Onion's aware of it. That book in which Andy finds the napkin, that's all about disruption. The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen lays out the way disruption, or disruptive innovation, can pose an existential risk to even the biggest companies, and the way it also allows outsiders, new entries, disruptors, to leverage that risk and make it big, change the landscape of the market. Now, I'm sure there is another point to be made here about hubris and irony, that while the shitheads of Glass Onion have a superficial knowledge of these ideas, they've misidentified themselves, that Miles doesn't consider he's become part of the establishment, could be the target of disruption, not its originator, but that isn't what I want to focus on. No, for now, let's just ask a question. Is disruption good? Certainly it is for the disruptor, right? Christensen would agree, Glass Onion's shitheads presumably would, but what about in the abstract? Is this ongoing cycle of disruption and innovation good for the market, for the economy, for the world? Well, in Miles' eyes, it would seem so. Whenever he talks about this process, disruptors are figured as bold, innovative, building the world of tomorrow. Disruption is understood as almost economic evolution, as development, tending toward perfection, as good. This is a point Nilesh Rathi makes in a post on Medium.com entitled Glass Onion, a Materialist Mystery, which I've linked below. Rathi links Miles' valorizing of disruption to the way our culture has long championed capitalist innovation, the celebration of Thomas Edison, the captains of industry, the way we see this trailblazing as progress, and then links Helen's rejection of this, her awareness that Miles' so-called disruption is built on wealth siphoned from Andy's labor, to an observation Marx and Engels made in that seminal manifesto. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Paraphrased then, these tycoons don't disrupt things because disruption is good. They do it because they want to maintain their status, maintain the system which grants them this status, and that continuing disruption, paradoxically, is necessary for this. As Rathi puts it, the rich, in order to win out over each other, must change the world around them in order to find new ways to profit off of it. The constant revolutionizing of the instruments of production, or, disruption in Miles' sense, isn't thinking outside the box, it's an essential part of the box's self-regulation. Returning to Marx and Engels for a moment, the manifesto continues, constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. In other words, disruption is the essential characteristic of capitalism. So looking at the shitheads, looking at Miles Bron, regardless of their revolutionary posturing, all this disruption occurs firmly within the bounds of capitalism, and within the bounds of the cultural superstructure which legitimizes and maintains this system. So if you're a wildly successful businessman, maybe this type of disruption in the abstract is good in a macro sense. But for the rest of us, yeah, not so much. So if this is disruption, and Helen is Glass Onion's one true disruptor, does that mean Helen bad? Well, no. See, the way Glass Onion theorizes disruption, hell, even the way Miles Bron theorizes disruption, is a little grander than the way Marx and Engels, even Christensen, approach their similar concepts. Seemingly inspired by the latter, by the innovator's dilemma's focus on innovative disruption as an S-curve, Miles talks about an inflection point, leading to a bigger decision, the decision to break the thing nobody wants broken, the system itself. Miles thinks that's what this lot have done, are doing, but he's misjudged their positioning. Maybe Birdie's use of sweatpants to uncancel herself is in some way innovative. Maybe Claire's soccer mom gubernatorial success is too. Maybe the same could be said for Miles' new fuel, Claire, if it worked properly. But none of these things break the system. They just slightly reshuffle it. At most, if we're being generous, these things break subsystems. The mechanics of cancel culture, the pack-oriented machine of American politics, and in Claire's case, the energy economy. Some of these things are significant, but they aren't the system, and they're only broken, or perhaps more accurately, lightly jostled, in order to raise the would-be disruptor to a higher rung on that ever-present, unshakable late capitalist ladder. Basically, the shitheads have taken that ladder for granted, assumed its presence as an inevitability, and so it can't be the system, because systems can change. The system, the thing disruptors break, must be within, must be smaller in scale. But Helen, as usual, goes one step beyond. Helen breaks the thing she isn't supposed to break. That thing isn't the Mona Lisa itself, but the painting's destruction is what topples the thing. This artifact had been entrusted to Miles because his power and status had created an illusion of competence and sophistication. The money helped, obviously, but do you think the Louvre would have loaned it out if they'd known Miles was fueling his house with unstable, flammable material? If they'd even been aware it was a possibility? If they'd have thought for one moment that Miles was the type of person to do something this thick? Simply put, the mythology of capitalism asserts that the best people will be the most successful people. Miles is the most successful, so he must be the best. The type of person who you can trust to hold the Mona Lisa, who deserves a life of luxury and influence. And this is what's broken here. The false justification the wealthy give us for their wealth, their prominence, their respect, the acceptance of this myth, and the resulting reality distortion field that surrounds our perception of people like this. Helen doesn't overturn the system in its entirety by burning the Mona Lisa. Capitalism itself isn't vanquished with Miles Bron. But what Helen does here is impressive. She sees that the fiction of capitalism and this web of status and control which governs the shithead's actions here, these aren't a given. The thing, that thing she isn't supposed to break, isn't some immutable truth external to the system. It is a system, an artificial one. It just pretends otherwise. The basic hierarchy that underpins their relationship, their dependency, their obedience to Miles isn't natural, isn't inevitable, that it is something constructed, and as a result, it can be demolished. It isn't beyond disruption. The others have seen the system, the box, have succeeded at playing its game, have come out on top, and convinced themselves that's disruption. Helen smashes the box. And that's what we see in this beautiful, explosive ending sequence. After cutting the Gordian knot, Alexander of Macedon, perhaps better known as Alexander the Great, went on to become the ruler of one of history's largest empires, a feat that he accomplished in a decade or so, by never losing a battle. His reign saw the Hellenization of vast swathes of land, and marked the end of Greece's classical era, and the decline of the polis system. The time of the city-state had drawn to a close, and in becoming King of Asia, in building this empire, Alexander would unknowingly inspire kings, rulers, Caesars for centuries. The previous status quo? The system which seemed to immutably govern the Mediterranean? Alexander reduced it to dust. At the end of the day, there are a lot of ways you could read the ending of Glass Onion. You could take it simply as ridiculous, maximalist action, the fitting end for Miles Bron's gaudy idiocy. You could do what I've seen a few people do, and take this cathartic iconoclasm as autobiographical. Rian Johnson is, after all, a man who's been subjected to plenty of vitriol for attempting to question the substance behind beloved images. Put that together with this film's derision for ultimately empty puzzles, and hey, maybe Johnson was drawing from experience here. But I think this is a powerfully, fiercely hopeful scene. See, I've seen a few people criticizing Glass Onion's treatment of wealth for not going far enough, that it shouldn't have pointed out some billionaires aren't deserving because that implies some are. I think that's a valid feeling to have, but I don't think it's the only thing we should take away. Because to me, what Glass Onion shows us here, through Helen, through her defeat of Miles Bron, his hold over these people, over the world, her destruction of the Mona Lisa, the mythology of capitalism, is simply that nothing is beyond disruption. And a film ending on such a powerful affirmation of impermanence might seem bleak, but now, today, I think it's uplifting. We need that reminder. Disruption, real disruption, has become a necessity. Real wages keep dropping, year on year global wealth disparities keep shooting upward, and oh yeah, unless we change our course drastically, like tomorrow, we're a few short years away from catastrophic shifts in the global climate, which will displace and endanger millions. Either we take hold of this idea that nothing, not even the system itself, is immutable, and we change it, or yeah, we're in trouble. It isn't always as simple as Helen makes it seem here. None of us can fix this ourselves, not right now, but in the meantime, we can help. So vote, spread the word, protest, organize. And if you want to get started having an impact right now, let me tell you about TabForACause. It's really simple, a web extension you add to your browser that just puts a couple of ads in the corner of the screen when you open a new tab and uses that to fund charitable donations. That's it. There's no catch, no fees. All you have to do is follow my link in the description, sign up once, then use the internet as you would normally. That link will set you up with Tab4Trees, a super easy way to fund conservation efforts. Tab4Trees supports Eden Reforestation Projects, a charity that employs thousands of workers the world over to plant and protect new trees, over 15 million a month. Every time you open a new tab then, you generate a little bit of cash, which will go towards Tab4Trees' ongoing donations, but also I'll get a little share. So it's an effort-free way to help support my efforts with this channel, while also, more importantly, getting this change started. To date, Tabbers have raised over $1.5 million for charity by doing almost nothing. Links below, get it installed. I have. That's the end of this video anyway. I'd love to know what you all thought, and what you think about disruption in Glass Onion more widely. Is it a force for good, or is it just chaotic neutral? I really appreciate everyone who's liked, subbed, and shared after watching my previous Glass Onion videos. I think that's why they're doing so well. So, feel free to keep that going here. And I want to extend a quick thanks to all my current Patreon supporters on screen now. I will be posting a few additional thoughts on this topic over there, so if anyone else wants to check them out, see your name up here next time, and help keep videos like this possible, that link's in the description below too. Thanks for watching though, and I'll see you all in like a few days for a video on Knives Out and Trumpism. Gonna be fun.